Well, good morning and welcome to this morning's reflection. It is good to be together again this morning. I'm going to continue looking at who Jesus is in an attempt to really come to grips with who this man is that we are called to follow. Almost to blow the dust away and reveal the reality of who Jesus is behind all of the works that have been written about him and all of our cultural perceptions of him. Not that we can do that perfectly, but we can try. Karl Barth used a helpful analogy, and he said, when a man stands by a window gazing into the street, and outside people are shading their eyes with their hands and pointing up into the sky, the person standing looking out cannot see what they're looking at because of the overhang of the building. We live 2,000 years after Jesus, and we have a view like that man. We hear the shouts and the exclamations. We study the words of the gospel, and we read many other books. Yet no amount of neck craning will allow us to see Jesus in the flesh. If you read books about Jesus today, you may encounter Jesus as a political revolutionary, as a magician, as a Galilean charismatic, as a rabbi, or a simple peasant, or a Pharisee, or an Essene. In the midst of such confusion, how do we answer the question, who is Jesus? This Jesus who changed history managed at the time to escape the attention of most of the historians of his time. So not much has been written about him. And the gospel writers left out much of what might be of interest to us today. They actually skipped 9/10 of his life. They never ever described his physical appearance. And the details of his family life remain scant. Thousands of books have been written about Jesus, and this overload of scholarship can have a numbing effect on us. But when we return to the Gospels, the fog around Jesus' life lifts. J.B. Phillips wrote, after translating and paraphrasing the Gospels, I have read in Greek and Latin scores of myths, but I did not find the slightest flavor of myth here. No man could have set down such artless and vulnerable accounts as these unless some real event lay behind them. Yes, some books have about them the sour smell of propaganda, but not the Gospels. Mark records what may be the most important event of all history, and he records it in a brief sentence, whereas theologians might use words such as propitiate, atonement, and sacrifice. Mark simply writes, with a loud cry, Jesus breathed his last. And then in the Gospels we have odd scenes such as Jesus' family and neighbors trying to put him under suspicion for insanity. Why include such scenes? Do they not still leave us asking the question, who is this man? And Jesus himself, when challenged, he did not offer any kind of airtight proof of who he was. He dropped clues here and there. And in some ways, the Gospels throw the decision about who Jesus is back onto the reader. And so when you read the Gospels, it's more like a whodunit or a who was he detective story. But there's no doubt that when we read the Gospels, we always experience a renewal of energy. As if God is saying to us, examine me, test me. You decide. You decide. And when we really look at the life of Christ, we see that he was, or bears, very little resemblance to the Jesus that we may have met in Sunday school. And in many ways bears very little resemblance to the many books and articles and sermons produced around his image. And this is an important point. You see, Jesus was not tame. And I think we have tried to tame him. But he was not tame. Other people affected Jesus deeply. Obstinacy frustrated him. Self-righteousness infuriated and deeply irritated him. And yet a simple faith thrilled him. In many ways, he was more emotional and more spontaneous than the average person, not less. And he was more passionate than the average person, not less. We cannot pigeonhole Jesus. A quandary, perhaps, that we face is that Jesus spoke so little about the Roman occupation, which was what everybody was speaking about at the time. It was at the core of the pain of Jewish life. But then he picked up a whip and he drove out the petty profiteers in the temple, but said nothing about Rome. He could be stabbed to the core by sympathy for a stranger and yet turn on his friend with the retort, "Get behind me, Satan." He had very strong views on rich men and loose women, and yet he befriended both. In many ways, there are many seeming contradictions in the life and teachings of Jesus. It is this man that we need to come to understand, this man of apparent contradictions, this man of mystery, frustrating mystery. Yet the man who reveals the nature of God and calls us into relationship. This is the man we must come to know. Amen.